So I just wanted to hear from you in terms of Pan-Africanism. What does that actually mean to you?
Being able to reconnect back to the African surfers, right? So we have, the African American surfers in the Americas. On the side of Africa, where you have these amazing surfers that are up and coming. For me, Pan-Africanism within the context of surfing is really connecting. Like, there's so many amazing surf spots in West Africa, for African Americans to really travel there to reconnect to their roots. And I think through that, specifically for surfing, there could be a better synergy, right?
Yeah, and if I could add just quickly, I think for me, again, it's twofold. It's like, one is a connection with other people of African descent, I think, which is extremely powerful. And I think that would help the second part of what I think will be very beneficial, I think or what my definition of Pan-Africanism, how it means to me, is really, finding out more about your own African history and your own connection to Africa and how that shapes who you are and how your community is.
All right, you guys, let's get into first.
There is a movement promoting our stories, and many of us grew up with a strong craving for images we can relate to. Production teams, writers, creative heads have come together to tell stories, and this podcast is their voice. The themes covered are very relevant to the Black community, and anyone concerned by the social and racial injustices that are in place to stifle this voice. The Pan-African voice is not easily heard, and here we talk about our movies, that film or doc which you heard about but didn't get to see. What was the story? Where can I watch it? It now has a voice. Tune in. We walk you through these stories and interview the filmmakers. Welcome. Karibu sana. Karibu sana.
And starting right on the lens. Ready? And action.
Okay, so want to welcome David Mesfin to another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast. And today he's going to talk about his feature documentary called Wade in the Water. So before I introduce you, I'm just going to give a little summary of the plot. And Wade in the Water is a feature documentary focused on telling the story and history of surfing from a really Pan-African perspective. It follows Black surfing communities and describes some of the challenges they face, as well as the benefits of the sport. It's really beautiful documentation of the sport's evolution across the whole globe. And it's really a unique viewpoint. So, without further ado, I want to hear more about who is David Mesfin. Like, I know you're a creative director, but tell us a little bit about your kind of past, present, future career, and, how it relates to your passion for surfing.
Wade in the waters. Wade in the water, children, wade.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So you said the word passion, and I think that's what drove this project, is passion. And to get to that passion, for me, it's a passion of storytelling, and it's a passion of sharing the experience I've had in my life, and also sharing the experience other people had, these amazing Black individuals in the surfing industry, and also, people from academia that can speak about the amazing story of Africa and this, what you said, which is a Pan-African perspective of what it is to be a Black person and to be in this industry of surfing. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Ethiopia during the Russian, the Communist Revolution, I should say. And I left at a very young age. I was adopted by a family in St. Augustine, Florida. It's, the oldest city in America, has a lot of history, has history from, dark history from the Civil Rights Movement and prior to that as well, but also was part of the Spanish colony. So a lot of history. I arrived there, and at the time, I didn't know how to swim or surf, and I lived right on the beach. So the first task was to learn how to swim. And then after I learned how to swim, I ended up, getting to the water, getting to surfing. And honestly, I just fell in love with it. For me, I always say the ocean or Mother Ocean became more of an inspiration, a place of tranquility and really healing. As a young person, when you leave your whole family and you're in a town, you don't know anyone, but, don't get me wrong, great family that took care of me and raised me. I needed an escape, and the ocean was my escape. It was my refuge. So I fell in love with the ocean, and I also fell in love with the sport of surfing. And that continued, through high school, college, and eventually I moved to California for multiple reasons. I always say one was education. There was a better school for advertising and design, and that's what I wanted to pursue at school. The other was better waves on the West Coast. And last but not least, there was a lot more Ethiopian women on the West Coast than in a small town, St. Augustine, where I met my wife. And it all worked out. The next thing about, this, time back, weight in the water, I continued to surf, but I would see, Black surfers here and there. It's mostly, as you know, it's the West Coast. If you see Black people, surfing, it's that classic nod. You acknowledge each other, you kind of protect each other. But in 2011, a good friend of mine, Alatash Kabade, who owns an art gallery in LA, she told me about a group called Black Surfers Collective. And she said, hey, you should join this group. They're actually out here establishing the Nick Gabaldon Day. And Nick Gabaldon is the first documented Black surfer. So they were really honoring him. And in return, what they were doing was they were teaching kids from inner city, kids from, BIPOC community, learning and connecting to the ocean. And I went there and I just fell in love with it. And the people embraced me and became good friends. And that relationship continued until, it still is. But during, COVID and Black Lives Matter, that's when the initial seed of Wade in the Water came. And for me, it was really wanting to give back to the community and this ocean that I love. So it became an art piece. It was doing portraits of Black Surfers Collective and selling it. Maybe the money will go back and support them. But as I started the project, I wanted to do a bit more research, understanding what it is to be a Black surfer. What is the history behind it, right? So that's where I started picking up several books. And one of the books that I picked up was a book called Afro Surf. And it had just come out. And in there, on like the intro chapter, there's, Kevin Dawson, Professor Kevin Dawson had written that surfing existed in Africa 1,000 years ago. And to me, that was really the tipping point. It was like a moment of like, wow, this is something we really need to embrace. This is something that needs to be shared beyond a social post. Is there more to this other than a portrait? Can I turn this into a documentary? So I reached out to Professor Kevin Dawson and he said, yes, you'd be interested to be in the documentary. And at that point, I started building the structure of this story. Where do we begin? This origin story that leads to these amazing pioneers like Nick Gabaldon, Sharon, who's, the first African-American women surfer, pro surfer. They're all here in Southern California. From these pioneers, there's this interesting story that every surfer feels, which is, the connection to Mother Ocean is a spiritual connection, getting that angle. And then at the end is really looking at the future of, Black surfing, because post Black Lives Matter and, the death of George Floyd, a lot of new organization came out in Southern California. And a lot of these new organizations were developing new programs for, teaching kids how to surf, new programs and bringing people into the community. And I really wanted to tell that story. And interestingly, Bayan joined us. Bayan became, the executive producer on the project. And he knew a lot of these younger, newer organizations. So he was able to introduce me to them. I knew Black Surfers Collective. So really, it's a narrative of origin. It's a narrative of, pioneers, spirituality, and then really looking at the future of Black surfing.
Thank you, David. That was a very good in-depth
background and history of the importance of it. That's what I was actually going to ask you. Why do you feel like it was important to tell this story? And what other advice would you like to give to people that are facing challenges within the sport itself?
Yeah, so, the telling of the lesser known history of Black surfers, I think is very important for multiple reasons. One is, there's the stereotype narrative that Black people don't swim, Black people don't surf, that you hear all the time, right? It's really to counter that narrative. And the second is really bringing this awareness that, African people, mostly, the coastal lines, right? The west coast of Africa, for the most part, these are people who have this rich aquatic culture that it's not really very well recorded, or a lot of people are not aware of it. And the documentary really gets into specific stories of how, even though it's European perspective because they wrote it, it's interesting to hear and to read their perception of Black people and the connection to aquatic, right? They consider them to be amphibians, the way they swim. And it's not just like men. Women were amazing swimmers. They're within the documentary, Kevin Dawson talks about how, women used to dive for cowrie shell, and that was, currency back then. And that was their job, but at the same time, they used to compete with men and, over the water, underwater. They were just amazing swimmers. So there's all these amazing stories not a lot of people know about. So I think it's really those two stories. One is like awareness of our rich history as aquatic people. And then the other one is really to counter the stereotype that exists in America.
If I could add to that just quickly as well is, just the women's kind of role or kind of part of the aquatic culture is women were actually responsible for teaching their kids how to swim from a very young age. And that was like a big part of their responsibility, just because, when the kids got older, a big part of their lives would be in the ocean. Like a lot of them would be fishermen, a lot of them would be diving for cowrie shells, or just, they would definitely be spending a lot of time by the water. So, or diving in general for fish or whatever. And so that was incredibly important that they knew the basics. They had to be strong swimmers by the time they were, working age. And so women, they were actually tasked with, just like any other motherly kind of role, is like, hey, teach the kids these things. And that was just their role. And so that was a pretty amazing thing for me to learn. Like a lot of the Europeans, they had no idea what they were seeing. And they actually thought that the mothers were trying to drown their kids. And so they had no clue, but the mothers, they were actually teaching their kids just basic skills to live in their society. So I thought that was really interesting.
I also found it intriguing how something that really stuck was the emotional cord and the therapeutic elements found within the water by some of the surfers, right? I know you've been referring to the ocean as like Mother Ocean, and it sounds like you do have that same sort of like spiritual and healing connection. Do you feel like you've passed that on to, like your family and maybe your kids and just like, people around you? Do you feel like they've also built that sort of connection?
Yeah. So in terms of my family, I've tried to get my kids to learn how to surf. So I have a 17-year-old who, as a father and a surfer, I took him out at a young age and he was like, I'm not having it. He took some water. And so I learned my lesson with my daughter, who is 7. I'm like taking my time, teaching her how to. But I think, if you ask any surfer, the spiritual connection with Mother Ocean is very much the reason that they're out there, right? It's that solace moment when you're out in the water and you're duck diving. And I have this intro animation for the documentary. The opening title is basically Mother Ocean calling you to reconnect with her, right? Mami Wata calling us to reconnect. And there's a moment that I feel like, even personally, there's a moment when surfers, when a big wave comes, you duck dive. And in my opinion, at that point, like while you're under until you come out, you lose consciousness. And that's the moment you really connect with the ocean. So I think a lot of people feel that, like if you're out there, you feel that. If you're out there and accidentally you turn around, you see a dolphin jump, a pelican fly, those are the moments like where you're really connecting with nature and Mother Ocean. So it's one thing to be surfing, it's another to be out there and experiencing nature. So I think most surfers feel that. That's why we're out there. But you have what's your experience like?
Yeah, totally, totally. I think I can definitely relate to all of that. In terms of, during a surf session, there's definitely, this connection with nature. You just have yourself and the board, and, you're just out there in this big blue ocean that you have really no control over. And so I think that, and then the connection with the animals, right? The aquatic animals like a fish, and seeing a turtle's head and a dolphin, like that's really amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I really liked the importance of the historical truths that were uncovered in the documentary about the relationship between Black people and water. I mean, I haven't seen those expressed from like a really Black perspective before. So for me, it was like, I don't know, maybe there have been, but it was the novelty of it for me. So that was really, really, just drawing for me and really good to see. I wanted to hear from you, like how different do you imagine the sport to be in the future? And what is most exciting for you about the change that's clearly happening?
So I think the industry has a long way to go. And, when we started this project, one of the organizations that ended up supporting us is World Surf League. And that's really the organization that supports all these big contests around the world, US, you name it, everywhere, right? So their task at changing, the landscape of the surfing industry, and they're working on it. That said, I think they have a long way to go. And we're grateful to be sponsored by them. But it also, like any other task, project, and organization, I think we have a long way to go. I think it's important to acknowledge is there's been amazing surfers in the past, men, women, and, people actually in the industry that had different roles, whether it's, shaping boards or being part of contests, in every part of the world, right? So it's important to acknowledge those people. Those are the legends, in my opinion, that have kind of kept the torch. But when you look at the future, I'm really hopeful, and we're hoping, this documentary, and there's been other documentaries, is that it would inspire the next generation of Black surfers, whether it's you want to go out and connect to Mother Ocean, just being a soul surfer, or do you want to be a competitive surfer? Hopefully this not only inspire you, but let you know that this is part of your culture. This is something you should definitely embrace and own, right? And find your own way of expressing yourself. In the documentary, I haven't traveled to Africa, but, Salema Masekela, who, his father was an amazing jazz musician from South Africa, talks about his experience in Africa, how, you go from, Senegal to Angola to all these different places. And the way he expressed was like every little town, every city had like their own way of embracing surf culture in their own, fashion or style and so forth. So that's unique. That's the thing about, being Black. It's like you're always pushing and changing and bringing new ideas, new concepts, new ways of, music, art, you name it, culture, right? So that's what I'm really looking forward to. And talking about Africa, I think that's an interesting place. There are some amazing surfers from, west coast of Africa that we've met that are in the documentary, like from Senegal, Sharif City, and then you have Josiah from South Africa, who's in the documentary. I mean, these are like phenomenal surfers, right? So we asked them the same question. What do you think about surfing in Africa? They're like, there's some amazing surfers in Africa. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of Africa in terms of like competitive surfing.
The first account of surfing in Africa was written in the 1640s by a German merchant traveler, Michael Hammersen.
Anytime I get into the ocean, I just feel like I'm blessed. I'm being baptized. And so for me, I just want to share that.
I worked in the outdoor industry. As much as I enjoyed it, I never really felt comfortable because there wasn't much representation.
I started Intersection as a way to create a safe space and a welcoming space and a
fun space and a positive entry point for other women of color who want to learn how to surf.
It's a collective of all of us telling our own stories so that we can have a history, a legacy that we can all be proud of.
This movement of surfing is just a part of the whole movement of Black and brown people taking back their place in the outdoors.
Yeah, and just for context, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
So we threw the name Chris Dennis. Chris Dennis is from Trinidad Tobago, and he has a nonprofit there. Amazing guy, and he's sponsored by Vans. I want to say, yeah, he is. And he does these therapeutic sessions with kids. So there's a lot of that.
I got my mental together. I got my spiritual together. I need a physical outlet. And that's when the idea of surfing popped back up.
Wade in the waters. Wade in the water, children, wade.
Yeah, that's really that was a really touching part of the whole documentary as well. And I'm excited to hear, because as a community, there's generally like a lot of healing needed. So it was just beautiful to see. And keeping on that theme, like I said, I'm so in love with the fact that you made all those connections between sort of African Americans practicing and people all over the world and the continent. So I just wanted to hear from you in terms of Pan-Africanism. What does that actually mean to you?
Right. So the Pan-Africanism is really, as surfers, is being able to reconnect back to the African surfers, right? So we have, the African American surfers in the Americas who have all the opportunity in the world in terms of, surfboards, wetsuit, you name it, right? Not being materialistic, but then again, on the side of Africa, right, you have these amazing surfers that are up and coming. For me, Pan-Africanism within context of surfing is really connecting. Like, a lot of African Americans travel like to parts of Hawaii. Nothing wrong with Hawaii. I love Hawaii. But I think we're missing the opportunity to really reconnect. Like, there's so many amazing surf spots in West Africa, for African Americans to really travel there to reconnect to their roots and really get to know these surfers, these, amazing, individuals that are up and coming or established organizations. And I think through that, specifically for surfing, there could be a better synergy, right? It's just my take of like what Pan-Africanism would mean in context of African Americans and Africans. That would be my hope, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think reconnecting is one of the main components of the whole Pan-African, ideology, and just remembering that there is somewhere for us and that we were all one at one point. So that is refreshing to hear. But in the documentary, there were firsthand accounts of systemic racist patterns as a result of the increasing value of the beachfront real estate. In terms of like lack of access, how do you think that's affected Black people in participating in the surfing community or even other like water sports?
Right. So, historically, what we covered was what took place in Southern California during the Jim Crow era. And a lot of that is covered by, Alison Jefferson, who is a historian, has an amazing book. And she gets into, what happened, Bruce's Beach, the Pacific Beach Club, and Huntington Beach. And then La Bonita is another location in Santa Monica, and then Ebony Beach Club, right? So there was this pattern of using eminent domain in the 3 of the 4 cases to remove African Americans from the beach area or community. And as you know, historically, right now, Bruce's Beach has been returned to the family after so many years. So there is this pattern that took place that moved really African Americans from that connection to Mother Ocean. So a lot of African Americans have moved to the inner cities, there's some families that we've interviewed that still reside in Santa Monica. In the documentary, we wanted to make sure there's a representations of them. I think when it comes to surfing, for the most part, most of us are driving to the beaches. Not a lot of people can afford properties to live there, even rent, right? So it's the only way you can get there is driving, or nowadays in LA, you can take the bus, which is great. Public transportation is better now. And then in terms of the industry, again, it's difficult. It's an industry just like golf, right? It requires a lot of training. It requires a lot of connections. It requires a lot of showing up at, these beaches where you're one of many, people of color. It's changing now, but in the past, you used to be like, just you're the only person. It's almost like being at a country club and just being an outsider, and you just never felt comfortable, right? So it's not only the financial, but it's just how you felt, the vibe around you that didn't make you feel welcome or wanted to be. Now, that said, I think I give credit to surfers. They're completely different in terms of nature from, golfers. I don't know golfers, but I think the thing about surfers is because of the connection to nature, and I think because a lot of them end up having to travel beyond their surf break, they understand of being, out of place. So there is an embrace always out in the water. For the most part, I've never really had issues in the water, as long as you were like, not cutting people off, you're surfing at a local beach and you're not taking off on a wave of a local person. There are things that you can do in the water, and there are things you shouldn't do. And if you don't know those, you can really injure yourself or injure other people or get hurt. So there's a lot in surfing culture. There's localism, right? So within all that, once you figure that out, then you're free to surf. But if there isn't anyone there to teach you, to walk you through these cultural nuance, you'll never go back in that water after that one experience. Whether the surf, the wave taught you a lesson, slapped you, and you never want to go out, or someone said something to you. So it's really difficult. The advantage right now is with these amazing organizations, like Bayin is part of Soulfly, Ebony Beach Club, Call of the Water, and I'm calling organizations just in Southern California that have come out, and Black Surfers Collective, and there's some older organizations that have been around. What they do is really teach you these etiquettes, right? So when you come on the water, how to carry a board, how to paddle, how to catch a wave, things to avoid when you're beginning to surf. You shouldn't be where the crowd is. You should be in an area where there isn't really any crowd, even though the waves are small. So these are the things that we are teaching the younger generation so they can embrace the ocean. They can become, again, more of soul surfers or competitive surfers in the future. So I think it's more than financial. It's the culture of surfing as well.
Yeah, and I only have one quick thing to add to that is I think the way that Black people think about, or just people of color think about surfing is very different than the way just Caucasian communities think about surfing, just the rest of the world thinks about surfing. And I think very similar to skateboarding. If you think about 30 years ago, skateboarding was not cool at all in the Black community. Like you couldn't be a skater. Everyone would make fun of you. But nowadays, most Black kids that I know, a lot of them have either skated or know someone that skates. And some of the best skaters in the world are actually Black people now. And, there's skate groups in like Ethiopia and all over the world. And so I think there are very, very big changes in that world. But I think the reason there is because the mentality of how people thought about skating in the Black world changed. And I think people like Lil Wayne have a lot to do with that in terms of, making it cool, part of the culture of like, I don't care, I'm going to skate. And then now my fans are going to look at me. It's like, oh, okay, this guy's skating, maybe I can skate. And then everything changes. And I think people like Brick at Ebony Beach Club and all kinds of people, and even with our documentary, a lot of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to put a lot of medicine in the candy. We're trying to entertain people, but at the same time, teach them these valuable lessons and teach them that it's actually part of your culture. It's actually always been part of your culture, and you don't have to feel ashamed about it, or you can own it, And so I think that will have a very big impact. And I think that's really the only way that people in mass will feel comfortable kind of going to the beach. And so I do think that is happening slowly, but pretty surely, and like David said, it's been happening for a long time, but I think in recent years, with the power of social media, especially with the powerful movement of like Black Lives Matter and the unfortunate event of George Floyd's death, I think that really made a big impact, made a big boom. So I do think things are changing.
That's definitely true. I think from the social perspective, and surfing is a little unique in terms of like the culture and like all behind it, rather than sort of the more other competitive like aquatic sports, just like straight up swimming or things like that. And just to add there, like the same kind of accounts of systemic racism that you describe especially in California, like the case of Bruce Beach, I did follow quite closely. I think eventually they even sold the beach back, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
Which
recently.
I was quite sad to see, in the sense of like just providing an area that is Black owned. Because, yeah, the point I wanted to add is that just because of how colonialism actually happened and began like primarily in the coastal areas throughout the continent, it's a similar situation back there. I think a lot of the ways of the water that you're describing, especially on the West Coast, were pre-colonial. And yeah, the way that the colonies and entrenched around the whole coastal line of Africa really has forced a lot of Black communities there to just shy away from water sports, I feel, even to this day. So I do hope that changes, because we shouldn't always have to be busing ourselves to get to these places. So I love that you're like kind of trailblazing this new community and through surfing, like as a culture.
It's interesting when you look at history, even on the East Coast of America, most of the farmlands were right by the ocean and rivers, pre-colonial, and reason being it was easy to put on a ship and ship it up north or wherever they needed to send it. But eventually, as African Americans became free through civil rights and post-Civil War, they eventually, the population changed on the beach. It wasn't African Americans anymore. It was mostly, Caucasians that kind of took over for leisure, whatever purposes. So that idea of being part of the aquatic culture kind of disappears. This is hundreds and hundreds of years that you've lost it. And I think for most of us as surfers, when we reconnect back to the ocean, I think that connection to the ocean comes back. And yeah, historically, that's the case. And yeah, that's the narrative. But we're trying to change that, just not even surfing, just come to the beach. And if you have to trek, you have to take the bus, get there, spend some time. And there's this beautiful tranquility about the ocean and you as a human being.
Under segregation, we could not be in the same environment, use the same beaches as white folks.
You still could go to the beach, but why would you want to go down there if you don't have a place to change your clothes, if you're not going to be able to get a meal easily, and if somebody may slash your tires or give you a ticket?
There was a couple of letters that I received. Tony Corley, Black Spook Surfer.
Wait in the waters. Wait in the water, children, wait.
And to kind of almost wrap up, where can we find this documentary?
Good question. So you can learn about the documentary at wadeinthewaterproject.com. We have the trailer there. And also there's an event section. In the event section, you can actually go in there and see where we're screening. Currently, we're going to be screening at the U.S. premiere is going to be at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. That's Saturday, February 11th and Sunday, February 12th. Following that, we'll have the PanAfrican Film Festival, which is February 18th, which is the following Saturday. And then after that, we'll be partnering with Surfrider LA and Patagonia Santa Monica on the 22nd of February in Santa Monica. And then following that, we'll be in San Diego at UC San Diego State University.
SD. You got a big distinction there.
San Diego State University, and that's in partnership with Black Resource Center, and that is going to be on the 23rd of February. So we'll be busy in February. And then last but not least, the best way to stay in touch with us is on IG, and it's under my name. It's David Mesfin Art. So if you look it up on IG, you'll be able to see all our posts. We'll update everyone with events, post-events, and parties and all that good stuff. So we're quite excited.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's one more. I just wanted to add, you could join a mailing list that you can find on our website. I think that is www.wadeinthewaterproject.com.
Right.
And then you can join the mailing list, and we send out newsletters with updates as well if you're more kind of tuned into email. But yeah, thank you guys both for kind of having us on the podcast, and thanks for the time. Thanks for the interest and the questions, and hope to see you guys at a screening hopefully soon this month. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Which one are you guys coming to? That's the question.
I'm on the East Coast, so I'm waiting for you all to come down there.
We'll be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am in Southern California. I'm in LA, so Santa Barbara's not too far at all.
There we go.
There we go. Kind of often. Yeah, I'd totally be excited to come up and see what you guys got going on.
Do you have any, last question, do you have any other plans, filmmaking plans specifically, or was this just like a passion project and just kind of more aligned with your activities in surfing specifically?
Good question.
Yeah, so this was, it was definitely a passion project. And, like I said, I work in the advertising industry. Bayan is an engineer. It all came together with passion. We were able to accomplish, within a year period of time, all of this. So in terms of the future, one thing that we keep hearing is, people asking us, hey, we have story to tell. And, the Caribbean, there's stories to be told in Hawaii. There's stories to be told in Africa. So there's a lot of stories that are out there. And we're only telling, this connection between Africa and Southern California and a little bit of Trinidad and Tobago through Chris Dennis. So yeah, we've been talking about, maybe there's an opportunity for, more of an expanded, more of a global, Black surfing story. So that might be something that we might take on.
Mm-hmm. That's what I would say. I think, Anna, the fact that you pointed out like Chris Dennis's surf therapy that he does with Waves for Hope Trinidad, that was like a really impactful part of the preview for you. And I think he's a very humble guy. Like I talked to him yesterday and he's like, why am I such a big part of the cut? He's like, he doesn't understand. I'm like, man, I'm telling you, your stuff is powerful, And so, like David said, I think our goal, our dream is really to keep on telling this story, which I feel like we just started scratching the surface, and there's just so much more that we could tell. And who knows what will come from this in the future? I'm sure we have people like champions from Senegal and South Africa. They're finding their way to the world tour. You have community organizations. You have all kinds of stories. You have amazing stories within the documentary. I think that we could put whole documentaries together about just those people. And so we would love to just keep on telling these stories. That's really the goal for us. So if we can do, Wade in the Water 2 and 3 and all the way until the rest of our lives, that would be ideal. That would be awesome.
That's great. Yeah, I'd like to see it expand. For me, it was just unique. Like I haven't seen anything similar from a perspective that is truly like of people who are of color, like telling their story. There's been other research, but it's not been kind of for us, by us. And so not that I've seen anyway. So it's really refreshing. So of course, we'd like to see more of that. Yeah, so it's interesting. And then lastly, do you have any advice? You mentioned like it took you a year to make the film. Was that like from sort of, I have this idea, let's start talking to people? Was that like from just 1 year? Do you have advice for other people who might have kind of similar passions or a story to tell and start, embarking on a documentary like of this magnitude?
Right. So in terms of taking on a project like this, I think the most important thing is passion, that you're passionate about the subject matter. I think the second thing is doing the homework, like doing the research. I spent a lot of time reading Kevin Dawson books and marking it up, Alison Jefferson, pre-interviews, really understanding people's perspective. And I didn't have the narrative of, origin, challenge, pioneer, and all that came later. However, I did have a questionnaire that was similar for everyone. So it was easy to editorially, there was always a section about what was your challenge? Do you have a spiritual connection with the ocean? So in the back of my mind, I knew editorially I had to kind of prepare to be able to cut between people and so forth. I think the other thing is having, people around you, having Bayan was tremendous help, just him doing a lot of the legwork for me, calling people, making appointments. So, and it's the community that is willing to tell the story. So whatever your subject matter is, you really have to come authentically to them and be really transparent of what you're trying to do, and it was never a financial project. It was always wanting to tell the story. And we've always, Bayan and I always talked about it and said, this is really to inspire the next generation of Black surfers. So how do we do it? We have to tell the story through our perspective, and we have to be honest with people on what we ask them and how we approach it. So far, I think it's been great, how the community has embraced it. And also it's been great how the process has been smooth in terms of not only us doing it, but other people coming on board. So that's the other part. When you get to post-production, initially we were thinking, we would do the edit, we would do the color, we would find music and so forth. But we lucked out. The story is so phenomenal that a lot of post-production houses ended up offering the services. So currently in the Den, which is a company that allowed us to, color and do the post-production, we ended up meeting an Ethiopian editor, Tafari, who ended up doing the edit. And then the music was, we screened at Patagonia. This group of musicians came in and they were California music. They're we love the documentary, but the music sucks. So, you want to help? So it's, one thing I think that was not my original plan, but a friend of ours, Michael Warner, recommended was what about you guys cutting an 18-minute version of this documentary and almost doing a tour? That was the other thing that was really helpful, because that seeded what a lot of people didn't know about. We would go to Patagonia store, we would go to Travelers Club and Santa Cruz, and we would go in San Diego and pre-screen just 18 minutes. But there you have these dialogues with people, and there is where you find people like California Music who are willing to come and support you. So it's really, planning, passion, having the people around you, and then doing the preceding, screening maybe a short version of the documentary while you're really working on the long form that's going to come out later and show it at film festival. So that was really the process of a year work.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I think, the passion I think is really, really important. And that's the only reason I was able to even work on this project. I saw how passionate David was about it. And I was okay, this guy's not going to quit tomorrow. It's going to be for sure a long-term thing. And so that's a big thing. And then I think having a North Star, like what David said, it's the goal of the project is really inspiring the next generation of Black surfers. We're just changing the way that, people think about surfing in general. And I think that is really important. And then I think just not stopping until you reach that, just keep on going forward. And it's been pretty smooth. We've been really thankful for how successful things have gone, way better than we've could have ever imagined. But, there have definitely been some bumps in the road and some really hard pills to swallow. And David and I, we've always had an optimistic point of view of this is not the end, this might be the end of one road, but we're just going to pivot and go another way and go around, or we'll figure it out, And so that idea, that perspective, I think is very valuable, of not being defeated and just, keep getting back up and just figuring it out a different way. And there's always something around the corner. There's one door closes, there's always another door. So that's the biggest things that I kind of have taken away from this project. And yeah, just communication with your team and making sure everything is smooth and on track. So yeah, that's what I would say the big takeaways for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for educating us, and good luck in educating the rest of the world on a very much needed, unique perspective.
And another one. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast. We are now on Spotify and Instagram. Just search Pan-African Film Podcast to follow and like us there. Our new platform is 360 Africa. That's 360 Africa. And we want to thank our Kenyan Vibe partners. Shout out to the KV Squad. Last but not least, we thank our editor Ace. Please send us your feedback, like, follow, and comment.